Hi guys, I'm Courtney from Gyroid Crochet, and I recently released the pattern for this cute little gyroid. I love Animal Crossing so much, so I was really excited to release this pattern. And most of the pattern is fairly beginner friendly, but there is one part of the pattern that is a little bit more difficult to do. And so I wanted to make a quick tutorial about how to do the arms for this pattern. Now, what makes the arms a little bit confusing for some is that we use short rounds. Short rounds allow the arms to curve naturally and without any type of wire or special kind of materials inserted into them to keep them curved. So if you don't have the pattern already, you can find the pattern on my Etsy, which I will link below in the description, and you can use the pattern to follow along when you're making your gyroid's arms. In this video, I'll show you two different methods for making your arms. One method is a little bit more complicated, but experienced crocheters will probably be able to follow along. The other method might be more suitable for beginners, but it does require a little bit more work and extra sewing in the end. So to start off, I've already made the base of the arm. These instructions are very easy, so I've completed rounds 1 through 5 for the arm already. But just some quick materials that you'll need to use. I use a 4mm hook. The rest of the body I use a 5mm hook for, but for the arms I want a very tight look to them, so I use a slightly smaller hook. You'll need some scissors or some type of yarn clippers. I use chenille yarn, so I like to use a lighter to burn the ends of the yarn so that it doesn't fray. And lastly, you'll need some stitch markers. So I like to mark the last stitch of the round, but some folks like to mark the first stitch. For this specific pattern for the arms, I think it makes more sense to mark the last stitch of the round, but either way works. So here I have the first 5 rounds of the arm completed. In order to make the arms naturally curve, the next few rows will be short rounds. That means that I'm only crocheting in a few of the stitches before I turn my work and crochet back in those same stitches. The reason that we do short rounds is because they will make the plushie naturally curve into this elbow kind of arm shape without using any type of wires or structure inside to maintain the curvy shape. So the short rounds create a little bit of an elbow for the arm so that we can change the direction of our crochet naturally. So this first 5 rounds is the bottom piece of the arm right here that you can see here. The short rounds will create this elbow piece that changes the course of the direction of our crochet so that when we finish off the last couple of rounds, they're crocheted in that direction, creating that kind of arm or L shape. When we start the short rounds, I like to mark the first stitches of each short round because those are stitches that we are not going to crochet into, and you'll see what I'm talking about as we go along. So for the first short round, again, this is after you've completed round 5, which is a full round. You're going to start the first short round, which is 5 half double crochets. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, just to make this stitch easier to find later, I'm going to mark a stitch marker in the first half double crochet that I just did for the first short round. I'm also going to place a stitch marker in the next stitch from round 5 that I did not crochet into for the short round. So this is my first short round. We've got the first stitch marked and 5 half double crochets, and then the unworked stitch from the previous round is marked here. At this point, I'm going to turn my work and start working on the second short round. Now when you turn your work, it's important not to chain here because we don't want any unnecessary gaps. So I just go straight to turning my work, and I'll do 4 half double crochets now into the previous half double crochets that I just made. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, this is the marked stitch because we are not placing a stitch into it until later, and I want to be able to easily find it. Now at this point we've finished the second short round. I'm going to go ahead and mark that first stitch that I did in the second round. And I'm going to turn my work again and complete the third short round. So for the third short round, there are 3 half double crochets. I'm going to crochet right into the stitch that I just made because we did not chain 1. So we're doing a half double crochet, a second one, and a third one for that third short round. Again, I'm going to mark that first stitch of the short round. And actually, I'm going to now move that stitch marker from the last stitch of round 5 to the third stitch of the third short round, the last stitch that I just created, because this is the new end of my rounds now. So at this point, we have a bunch of short rounds and a bunch of stitch markers in this arm. And you'll see what I mentioned before of the short rounds kind of changing the course of our crochet direction. So we have this arm, and now we're starting to have a little bit of an elbow for the arm, so that when we start to crochet again, the arm will be going in this direction now. For reference, this is what a completed arm looks like. And this is the arm that we're currently working on. So this is the little elbow piece that you can see here. So now we've completed the 3 short rounds, and we're going to go back to making full rounds of crochet. Now the reason that I like to mark all of my first stitches, the stitches that we did not work into, is because now we're going to need to find them easily, because we're going back to completing complete rounds of crochet, and we want to maintain the same number of stitches that we've had from the first 5 rounds. The other reason that I like to mark these stitches is because when you're doing short rounds of half double crochet, because the half double crochet has some height to it here, this is not a real stitch. But if we leave it unworked, it's going to leave a gap in our arms. So what we want to do here is maintain the same number of stitches that we had previously, but I'm going to use what I call fake decreases. And I call them that because I'm going to work into this loop here, but this is not an actual stitch. This is just the side of my half double crochet. So in order to avoid those gaps, I'm going to insert my hook into the side of my half double crochet that I just made. I'm also going to insert my hook into the front loop of my first marked stitch, because this is a real stitch that we did not work into yet. And I'm just going to yarn over and pull through those 2 loops. And that's going to help me to avoid any gap in my work without creating any additional stitches. So now I can take that stitch marker out. We're done with that stitch. And we're going to move on to the next stitch. So again, this is an empty space that we have here because it's the side of a half double crochet. And we want to work into this next real stitch, but I don't want to leave a gap in my work. So again, I'm going to create a fake decrease here. I'm going to insert my hook into this side of the half double crochet. Again, this is not a real stitch. And I am going to insert my hook again into the front loops of this marked stitch, which is a real stitch. I'm going to pull through those loops and pull through again. Now we're done with this little stitch marker there. And those last 2 stitches constitute the first 2 single crochets of the full round 6 from your arms pattern. Now the next 3 stitches of round 6 are slip stitches. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then we're going to do a couple single crochets. So the first one will go here. And because the next single crochet is coming up in this real stitch, but we have this gap here, I want to make sure again to close that gap, because this is not a real stitch, this is just the side of a half double crochet. So instead of doing a single crochet, I'm actually going to do a fake decrease. So this is the front loops of the stitch that was just marked. I'm going to also insert my hook into the side of that half double crochet, and I'm going to pull through both of those loops to create the next single crochet, which is really kind of a decrease. And now that'll close that gap. And the last 3 stitches of round 6 are 3 half double crochets. So I'm going to do my half double crochet into that stitch that was just marked, and then 2 more half double crochets. And now we have a fully complete elbow. And we're just going to finish off the arm with a couple rounds of single crochet. So now you can just go around and do your single crochets until you have a fully completed arm. I like to finish my arm with 1 extra slip stitch, and I will fasten off and burn the ends of my yarn so that it doesn't fray. And now my arms are completely ready to be sewed onto the body of a gyroid. Now I'm going to show you what happens if you don't do those fake decreases that I was talking about, which is completely fine to do. It's just going to leave you a little bit extra work when you're ready to sew your arms. So again, we're just going to start and complete the short rounds in the same exact way that we did before. So the first short round is again 5 half double crochets, and with this method you're still going to mark the unworked stitches, so the first stitch of each short round, as well as this unworked stitch after the short round. So I'm going to turn and complete the second short round now with 4 half double crochets. And again, mark that first stitch. Turn and do 3 half double crochets now. and mark that first stitch. And I'll move the stitch marker that was indicating the last stitch of the round to this stitch now, because this is still the new end of our round. And with this second method, this is a bit easier. You can just single crochet into the marked stitches. So I'm going to single crochet into this stitch, which was previously marked. I'm going to single crochet into this stitch and take out the stitch marker. But it's going to leave me with some gaps in the arm. But that's okay, we can always close them later. So I did my first 2 single crochets. I'll do 3 slip stitches. Another 2 single crochets. And then 3 half double crochets. And you'll do the first one in this marked stitch. So we have a pretty big gap here, and then we also have a little smaller gap here. But that's okay. We're gonna just finish off the last 2 rounds of single crochet. And because you have these gaps, you'll just have to sew them closed. So this is what it looks like with the first method. As you can see, there aren't any gaps here. And with the second method, it leaves some gaps, but you can just sew them closed with some yarn a little bit later. So you can fasten off with a tail to sew onto your gyroid. And with another piece of yarn and a darning needle, you can sew your holes closed. So that it doesn't show through anymore. And at this point, you can fasten off the yarn. And secure the yarn inside of the arm. I like to just tie a little knot and stuff it inside. And now you can't see those holes anymore. So either method works. I like to avoid as much sewing as possible, so I tend to do the first method, and because it makes sense to me, in my brain at least, it's just my preferred method. But if that first method is a little bit too complicated or you're not sure how to do it, you can just use the second method and sew those gaps closed. And when you sew those arms onto your gyroid, you want to make sure that you're sewing one pointing up and one pointing down. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. Leave me a comment below if there are any other tutorials that you would like for me to post, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!